Peter the First, normally known as Peter the Great, or in Russian Pyotr Veliky, was born in June 1672 and died in February 1725. Therefore, he was 52 years old when he died. He became nominally or officially the Russian Tsar already in May 1682, in other words, as a 9-year-old boy. Before 1696, he still ruled with his elder half-brother Ivan V. Through a number of successful wars, for example, against Sweden and the Ottoman Empire, he expanded the Russian Empire, capturing the ports at Azov and the Baltic Sea. He led a cultural revolution that replaced some of the Russian traditionalist and medieval social and political systems with ones that were modern, scientific, westernized, and based on the Enlightenment. He admired, for example, the German and French cultures. And one of the, whether direct or indirect, consequences of those reforms were that since the 18th century, many Russian aristocrats and other educated Russian people started to communicate largely, although by no means completely, in German and French. His reforms made a lasting impact on Russia, and many institutions of the Russian government trace their origins to his reign. Most notably, in terms of establishing cities, he established the city known as St. Petersburg in 1703 at the easternmost end of the Gulf of Finland, which is the eastern arm of the Baltic Sea, a shallow inlet of the Atlantic Ocean in Northern Europe. It also became the Russian capital, replacing Moscow, and remained that way until then, 1918. Named after the Apostle Peter and described as a newborn with good health, his mother's black, vaguely Tatar eyes, and a tuft of auburn hair, from an early age Peter's education was put in the hands of several tutors, most notably Nikita Zotov, Patrick Gordon, and Paul Menesius. Since Fyodor, his predecessor, did not leave any children, a dispute arose between the Miloslavsky family. Maria Miloslavskaya was the first wife of Alexis I, who had died in 1676, and Narishkin family. Natalia Narishkina was the second wife, over who should inherit the throne. Peter's other half-brother, Ivan V of Russia, was next in line for the throne, but he was chronically ill and of infirm mind. Consequently, the Boyar Duma, a council or assembly of Russian aristocrats, chose Peter, who was about to turn 10, to become Tsar with his mother as regent. In 1689, Peter's mother sought to force him to adopt a more conventional approach and arranged his marriage to Eudoxia Lopukhina in 1689. However, the marriage failed. 10 years later, Peter forced his wife to become a nun and thus freed himself from the union. By the summer of 1689, Peter, who had turned 17, planned to take power from his half-sister Sophia, whose position had been weakened by 2 unsuccessful Crimean campaigns against the Crimean Khanate in an attempt to stop devastating Crimean Tatar raids into Russia's southern lands. After learning of his designs, Sophia conspired with the leaders of the Streltsy, who continually aroused disorder and dissent. Peter, warned by the Streltsy, escaped in the middle of the night to the impenetrable monastery of Troitse Sergeyeva Lavra. There he slowly gathered adherents who perceived he would win the power struggle. Sofia was eventually overthrown. Peter I and Ivan V continued to act as co-tsars, although Ivan V, because of his physical and mental disabilities, was unable to rule. His mother, Natalia Narishkina, died in 1694, and Peter, then aged 22, became an independent ruler. And he became even officially the sole ruler of Russia in 1696, when his disabled half-brother Ivan V at last died. Peter was 24 years old. Even by the modern standards, he would be considered an extremely tall man, standing at 6 feet 8 inches or 203 centimeters. And by that time standards, when even men of, let's say, 5 feet 9 or 5 feet 10 inches tall were several inches above the average height, he was a giant. He was literally head and shoulders above his contemporaries, both in Russia and throughout Europe. However, his hands and feet were small, and his shoulders were narrow for his height. Even his head was small for his tall body. During his youth, Peter befriended Patrick Gordon, Franz Lefort, and several other foreigners in Russian service, and was a frequent guest in Moscow's German quarter, where he met his Dutch mistress Anna Mons. He wanted to make Russia into a powerful country, and therefore he believed that he should adopt those Western and Central European reforms. He even forced his court to adopt a French and Western dress. He required courtiers, state officials, and the military to shave their beards and adopt modern clothing styles. And as a way to achieve this, he introduced taxes for long beards and robes in September 1698. In 1700, he started the Great Northern War against Sweden, as a result of which he acquired the Swedish Estonia, Livonia, Ingria, and even much of the Swedish, or most of the Swedish Karelia, and therefore received a rather long coastline on the Baltic Sea. In 1697, he traveled incognito, or officially unrecognized, to Western Europe on an 18-month journey with a large Russian delegation, the so-called Grand Embassy. He used a fake name. His visit was cut short in 1698 when he was rushed home by a rebellion of the Streltsy, and he brutally put it down. In 1699, he changed the date of the New Year's celebration from September the 1st to January the 1st, and after Peter's reforms, the years were to be counted from the birth of Christ instead of the creation of the world. Thus, in the year 7207 of the old Russian calendar, Peter proclaimed that the Julian calendar was in effect, and the year was 1700. His last years were marked by further reform in Russia, and he also established the so-called colleges. We could call them ministries, where the decisions depended, interestingly enough, and democratically, notably, on a majority vote to replace the old and often ineffective prikazy. Yes, so the colleges included those of foreign affairs, war, navy, expense, income, justice, and inspection. So each college had a president or chairperson, a vice president or vice chairman, and a number of counselors and assessors and a procurator. Some foreigners were included in various colleges, however, they did not preside over them. Peter preferred to rely on groups of individuals who would keep check on one another. In 1722, he created a new order of presidents known as the Table of Ranks. Formerly, presidents had been determined by birth. He wanted to deprive the high-ranking Russian boyars or aristocrats of their high positions, and directed that presidents should be determined by merit and service to the emperor. The Table of Ranks was in effect for 195 years until the 1917 Russian revolutions. He decided that all children of the aristocrats should have some early education, especially in the sciences, and therefore in February 1714 he issued a decree calling for compulsory education, dictating that all Russian 10 to 15-year-old children of the aristocrats, government clerks, and lesser-ranked officials had to learn basic mathematics and geometry and should be tested on the subjects at the end of their studies. He launched the Russo-Persian War of 1722 to 1723, which drastically increased Russian influence for the first time in the Caucasus and Caspian Sea region and prevented the declining Ottoman Empire from making territorial gains there. He introduced new taxes to fund improvements in St. Petersburg, abolishing the land tax and household tax and replacing them with a poll tax. The taxes on land and households were payable only by individuals who owned property or maintained families. The new head taxes, however, had to be paid by the serfs or enslaved peasants and paupers. In 1725, the year when Peter died, the construction of Peterhof, or Peter's Court, adopted from the Dutch language, a palace near St. Petersburg, was completed. It was a grand residence, becoming known as the Russian Versailles. Peter was outwardly deeply religious, however, in his carousing drinking parties he often made fun of the religious matters. In 1721 he designed the Holy Synod as a council of 10 clergymen to preside over the Russian Orthodox Church. He forced the Russian men who wanted to become monks to be at least 50 years old, because he felt that too many able Russian men were being wasted on clerical work when they could be joining his new and improved army. Most parish priests were sons of priests, very poorly educated and very poorly paid. The monks in the monasteries had a slightly higher status where they were not allowed to marry. And politically, the Russian Orthodox Church became powerless. He had 2 wives, the first one Eudoxia Lopukhina, whom he effectively divorced in 1699, and then Marta Skavronskaya, a Polish-Lithuanian peasant, who converted to the Russian Orthodox Church, originally having been possibly a Lutheran, and took the name Catherine. His oldest child and heir, Alexei, was suspected of being involved in a plot to overthrow him. He was tried and confessed under torture during questioning conducted by a secular court. He was convicted and sentenced to be executed. However, he died of his injuries before he was executed in 1718. In 1724, Peter had his second wife Catherine crowned as empress, although he remained still Russia's actual Tsar or emperor. All of Peter's male children by that time had died. In the winter of 1723, Peter, who, despite being a giant, especially by that time standards, had never been a very healthy man, began having problems with his urinary tract and bladder. In the summer of 1724, a team of doctors performed surgery, releasing upwards of 4 pounds of blocked urine. He remained bedridden until late autumn. In the first week of October, restless and certain he was cured, he started a lengthy inspection tour of various projects. According to legend, in November 1724 at Lahta, along the Finnish Gulf, to inspect some ironworks, he saw a group of soldiers drowning near shore, and wading out into near waist-deep water, came to their rescue. And if this story was true, then this icy water rescue exacerbated Peter's bladder problems and caused his death. However, some historians have viewed this story skeptically, pointed out that the German chronicler Jakob von Stelin is the story's only source, and it seems unlikely that no one else would have documented such an act of heroism. Plus, the interval of time between these actions and Peter's death seems to preclude any direct link. In early January 1725, Peter was struck once again with uremia. Legend has it that before lapsing into unconsciousness, he asked for a paper and pen and scrawled an unfinished note that read, "Leave all to," and then, exhausted by the effort, asked for his daughter Anna to be summoned. He died of bladder gangrene, or gangrenous infection of the bladder. He is interred in Saints Peter and Paul Cathedral, St. Petersburg, Russia. And he definitely was one of the strongest Tsars or emperors of Russia, and served as a model for various later Russian rulers, and maybe even for some Soviet rulers.